Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about puppies. I didn't mean puppies, I meant solar. And we're going to be talking about the solar system and inverter types that are out there. If you want to know the basics, keep on watching. Alright everybody, let's talk about systems types. First we're going to go over the hybrid system. So to start out with a hybrid system, you're going to have your Mr. Happy Sunshine providing some rays down there to the solar panels. And then they're going to interconnect to one another and go down to your inverter. Also in this hybrid system, you're going to have some sort of battery. So that battery will also get connected to your inverter. Now this is a simpler explanation. There might be some additional components you need for this, but this is just covering the main components. Now in a hybrid scenario, we got our sunshine, panels keep making DC energy, it's going to the inverter. And then also we have DC energy coming from our battery. And then our inverter takes that DC and turns it to AC over to the breaker box. You'll have a back-fed breaker there. And then that breaker box is fed by the electrical meter. Electric meter to your grid. So in a when your grid is up scenario and your solar is making energy, the sun's up, your inverter, depending on how you have it configured, will either charge your batteries first or provide your house with AC first, however you decide to do it. You may want to have that energy go to your batteries to store for a nighttime solution where your battery backup can provide you energy at night. But in any case, if the grid goes down, your system can still make solar power energy and your home can be backed up with a battery in case there's no solar available. All right. Now, in a standard scenario where you don't have a battery backed up system, just a standard grid tie system, your solar panels will be making energy and providing that AC to your breaker box. Now, if your home appliances is not using enough energy to use up all that solar, it gets sent back to the grid. All right? And then your meter here will be a net meter, and it will calculate how much you've sold out and then how much you have pulled in from the grid. There's your grid tie scenario. Now we'll move on to talking about an off-grid scenario. So in your off-grid scenario, same kind of thing, a little different setup. We have our Happy Mr. Sunshine providing some sun rays down here to our solar panels. Those solar panels make the DC. And that DC will go down to your charge controller. And that charge controller will charge up your battery bank. So the battery bank will feed a DC to AC inverter, so that converts your DC to AC. And this AC will get fed to some sort of breaker box for use in your house. So basically you have to size your system pretty accurately because you have no grid to rely on and fall back on. And this is your standard off-grid scenario. Now there's a ton of different charge controllers and inverters that support this scenario, different style batteries, but this is just basically the basic setup of the major equipment in an off-grid scenario. Okay, let's talk about inverters. So first off, we have our string inverters. And we're going to talk about rapid shutdown first. And this back box here is going to be an inverter. Alright, so we have our happy sunshine just casting some rays down here on our solar panels. And those are going to get converted to DC by the solar panels. And then from your rapid shutdown device, your first leg is going to go down to the panel. We'll say that is our positive. And then these connect in a series to one another. And at the end of the line, it is going to come back to our inverter, and that will be our negative side. Then the inverter is going to convert that DC to AC, and supply that to your house. Now, the way that the rapid shutdown works is the inverter, or you'll have a third-party device doing power line communication, and it will say, hey, here's the signal, make energy. And the rapid shutdown will allow the voltage to pass through. Now, if the inverter goes down or your AC goes down to the inverter, it will not send that signal anymore, and your panels and rapid shutdown devices won't allow, the rapid shutdown device won't allow voltage to come out, except for a very minimal amount, so you can test to see if it's actually working. Now, a string inverter with optimizers, it works very much the same way. It is wired the same. It receives information from the inverter over the power lines, and it, generally speaking, performs rapid shutdown as well. So the difference between the optimized system is that if you have shade over one of your panels, let's say this one over here, it's not going to affect your whole string. So in a normal string inverter, that would decrease the efficiency of all the panels. In an optimized solution, it's only going to affect the one that's shaded. So the other thing that you get out of this is panel level monitoring and diagnostics. So in your app for your inverter, you'll be able to see individual outputs and be able to determine if you have a problem with one of them or if one's not working anymore. So that's a great thing about optimizers, but they come at a cost. They're generally a lot more expensive, not a lot, but they're more expensive than a standard string inverter. Standard string inverter, if you don't have any problems with sunlight and shading, you'll save some money. So now let's talk about the microinverters. So now we're going to talk about the microinverter system. And back here in the back, this is going to be a combiner. It could be directly to your main service panel as well. In this scenario, we're calling it a combiner. So your combiner will have a bus that goes up to your panels, and there'll be a terminator here at the end. We'll annotate that with a T, and that'll be your terminator. And each one of these microinverters will tee in to your bus. Okay? So now these microinverters, they take that DC and they convert to AC right at the panel. And then send that back to your combiner or your panel for use, or your main service panel for use. Now, the advantage of the microinverter is you have one for every panel, or some can support multiple panels, but we'll say one for every panel in this scenario. So if one goes down, you only lose that one panel, whereas if your string inverter goes down, you lose everything. So there is some redundancy there. And also it gives you that similar thing to optimizers, is the ability to rapid shutdown. You can have the ability to monitor panel level. And one thing that it provides is the ability to grow bigger. So say for instance you do a 8 kilowatt system and you see it's not meeting your needs, you could go add 4 or 5 panels with a microinverter to your existing setup without a huge cost. Whereas say for instance you have a string inverter that's a 5K string inverter and you want to add another 5K, well, you're going to have to get another inverter because your inverter is not going to be able to handle that. And that is the basics for the 3 major types of inverters: string with optimizers, and your microinverters. Now, one scenario is if your state doesn't or location doesn't require rapid shutdown, or you're doing this out in a yard, not on the roof, you may not need the rapid shutdown. In that instance, the panels would just series together, and then your start and your finish would go right back to the inverter. So very similar. All right, let's talk about string inverters and why you might choose a string inverter. Number one, it's the most simplest design, and it's going to be the least expensive of all the different types of inverters. Drawback is you don't get that panel level monitoring. So if you have a issue with one panel, you may not know as easily which panel it is. They're not very good in the shade. If you have a shady area and one panel is shaded in your string, then it's going to affect the efficiency of the rest of the panels in the string. An additional point, pro or con, whatever you say, you may need a rapid shutdown device, RSD. Depending on where you live in the states, you have different requirements. So, but most generally, you're probably going to have some sort of rapid shutdown device, and that's going to add a little additional cost. But it's still going to be your least expensive option out there, and it's the most simplest. Now let's talk about string inverters with optimizers. So they work well in the shade. So if you have a partially shaded string, then it's going to be just fine. You're going to get maximum efficiency out of all the panels, even the one that's shaded. You'll get the best that it's got. So that's a big benefit. Then you have panel level monitoring available. So you could see individually if you had one panel not doing well. Or you could see what kind of production you're getting based on the shade and whatever. So it's a nice benefit to have. But it's going to be more expensive than just a string system with rapid shutdown. Not a ton more because the rapid shutdown devices cost money, and so do the optimizers. But it's still going to be, you know, a certain percentage higher. So it's worth considering. Next up, we got microinverters. You might choose a microinverter for these reasons. They work really good in the shade. So it's just like the optimizers. You're going to get the most you can out of your panels at any given time. Panel level monitoring is available. It's easier to expand and less costly. So if you get yourself out there and you have a 6 kilowatt system and you realize that's only covering 50% of your power needs, it's fairly easy to go add 4 or 5 different more panels with optimizers, and you don't have to rewire everything. You just have to wire it in with what you have. So that's great. You don't really have that flexibility in some of the string inverter unless you oversize your system, and then it's not working at very good efficiency anyway. So this would be the best bet if you're not sure of where you're going to take your solar project. Alright everybody, that wraps up this video. I really appreciate you watching, and hopefully you learned something along the way. Don't forget to like and subscribe.